Hey there, and welcome to another Nutrition Essentials podcast, a spinoff of our popular Health Essentials show. I'm John Horton, your host. There's no question about the link between food and stress. Anyone who has turned to a pint of cookies and cream ice cream during a tough time understands that connection. But the food-stress relationship is a two-way street. Just as stress levels can affect your food choices can affect your daily stress levels. What you eat may be putting your body in a state of internal distress, which can lead to anxiety, fatigue, and even depression. Today, we're going to take a closer look at how diet shapes our mood and mental health. As always, we have registered dietitian Julia Zumpano on hand to look at the topic from the nutrition side. To learn more about the importance of managing stress, we brought in our go-to expert from Cleveland Clinic's Center for Functional Medicine. We'll let Julia make that introduction.
Thanks, John. The practice of medicine is more than just, medicine. Lifestyle choices involving diet and stress management can play a major role on how people feel. Dr. Melissa Young takes that sort of holistic approach to help people achieve optimal wellness. I'm looking forward to comparing notes with Dr. Young on how certain foods can reduce stress and allow people to feel better both physically and emotionally.
That's a great goal, Julia. Let's start working towards it. Dr. Young, it is so fabulous to see you again. Thanks for joining Julia and me on the Nutrition Essentials podcast.
Thank you so much for having me back. And these discussions are so exciting. So I'm really pleased to be here.
Well, they always are when you're with us. So
thank you.
Let's jump into our topic. We're all pretty familiar with the idea of eating during stressful times. I mean, there's a reason why we chow down on things called comfort food, right? But I've never really thought of food creating a stressful response in our bodies. It totally flips the script. So Dr. Young, how does this happen?
So, I think the concept of food as medicine has never been more important. And we're, understanding more and more about how food influences the body. Food and mood are definitely linked. That's clear in the medical literature. And I think about what we choose to eat and what foods we choose to avoid influences many systems in the body. And there's, again, clear medical evidence that nutrition affects our mental and emotional well-being. It influences our risk for anxiety and depression. But it's so interesting because certain foods trigger physiological reactions in the body that can lead to increase in blood pressure, heart rate, blood sugar, and in particular, diet in high in processed foods. So foods high in sugar, refined carbohydrates, thinking about the white foods, white bread, white rice, candy, cookies, things like that, leads to inflammation in the body. And also really important, they're stripped of important nutrients that the body needs. So these foods trigger this, what I call roller coaster ride of blood sugar. So your blood sugar goes high, it crashes, that creates stress hormones, it creates cravings for sugar. So that roller coaster is going to produce excess cortisol, our main stress hormone, and insulin that triggers the fight or flight state, so sympathetic nervous system. And all of this leads to inflammatory chemicals, free radical production in the body, and those are damaging chemicals. I like to think about they rust and age the body, and it disrupts the balance of the beneficial bacteria in the gut. So all this can lead to mood changes, like in the short term, fatigue, but then increases our risk then down the road for developing things like anxiety, depression, obesity, diabetes.
Wow, that was a lot going on there. So clearly, as you laid out, like what you eat, it does so many of these physical changes that you said blood pressure, blood sugar, your heart rate jumps, GI issues, inflammation, all of that. And that all makes so much sense with like what it does to your body. But I'm still a little like how that then affects your mental health. Like everything we just brought up seems very physical. So how do those changes kind of open the door for anxiety and depression to set in?
Definitely, and lots of connections here. Studies are showing that anxiety disorders are linked with those stress hormones and inflammation. They're showing links between mood disorders and the balance of our gut bacteria. As well, a diet high in the processed foods, as we were talking about, leads to nutrient deficiencies and even insufficiencies, like just not quite enough, even if that's deficient. And those are critical nutrients. So B vitamins, minerals, really important for our brain health. But as well, there can be changes in our antioxidant status if we're not getting all those good fruits and veggies. And that leads to the free radical damage. That leads to inflammation. It impacts the gut. Many people have heard of leaky gut. So if we have leaky gut, we can have a leaky brain, and so meaning inflammation. And all of that over time really increases the risk of anxiety and depression. Most people may not know about neurotransmitters and how a lot of them are produced in the gut. And what's interesting, our gut bacteria are the producers of neurotransmitters like GABA and serotonin, which are the calming neurotransmitters. So we need the right foods and nutrients for them to produce them. And there's so many links now between some studies show intake of probiotic rich foods, lowering social anxiety. Mediterranean diet has been showed to lower depression. And recent research actually shows dietary fiber is one of the most important factors in fighting anxiety and depression. Links between anxiety and lack of those nutrients, sugar and artificial sweetener intake by disrupting the microbiome leads to anxiety, lack of omega-3 fats, and too many omega-6 fats. And of course, we'll jump into these details kind of more in detail, but it's through all these interconnected mechanisms that these changes in our diet lead to anxiety and depression, mood changes.
Dr. Young, I think you made so many great points. Most of the time we see patients and they don't connect their feeling ill. I mean, they come to us with other physiological issues.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we go along and discuss and talk to them, they talk about their depression or the anxiety comes up. And it's actually one of the main concerns for them, but they've never connected it to their diet or what they're eating or even their inflammation. And I think this is such a phenomenal time that as you mentioned, understanding that food is medicine, and then our body, they're not individual parts, they're all together. And that's the key here, is that it's a whole body system. So if you have inflammation in your gut, it's going to affect your brain and your neurotransmitters and your mood. And it's also deeply connected. I know the gut-brain connection is a big one. Do you want to briefly discuss what that is?
Absolutely. So there's an intimate connection between our gut and our brain. Just as we touched on, most people aren't aware, most of our neurotransmitters are actually made in the gut. And the gut is really termed the second brain, and it's called the enteric nervous system. And it is highly influenced by the trillions of good bacteria that should make up our gut microbiome. And there's a bidirectional communication between the enteric nervous system and the central nervous system in the brain. So the bacteria in our gut produce anti-inflammatory chemicals, neurotransmitters, vitamins, also something called short-chain fatty acids that are anti-inflammatory, may protect us against bad bacteria and toxins. But really important, there's this crosstalk between both systems, and those chemicals, are going to talk to our central nervous system. And most people are familiar, those people who have irritable bowel know that their symptoms can worsen under stress. And there's a higher incidence of mood disorders in people with IBS. So it's just really those systems are so intimately connected and um, critical when we're thinking about, the influence of food on our gut.
Dr. Young, you had mentioned cortisol earlier too, and I know that that's the stress hormone, and we always think of that kicking up when you're in a stressful situation. But you're telling us like just food in and of itself can just get that system cranking.
Yes. So it's again what we choose to eat that can calm that system. And Julia and I will talk more about that and the certain nutrients like omega-3 fats, among others. But then the inflammatory foods or stimulating foods like too much caffeine are going to trigger that system and create, an increase in the sympathetic fight or flight system. So, that's when your heart races and you feel like your blood pressure is high. So, it goes both ways, which is so exciting because what we eat really can influence the calming of the system, in addition to all the wonderful things we've talked about in the past with stress management techniques.
Dr. Young, correct me if I'm wrong, but if everyone kind of has this level and unique level of cortisol and how it rises and falls, and everyone's level is individual, right?
Mhm.
But if you are prone to having those spiky levels of cortisol, or they tend to be spiked throughout the day, maybe more of an anxious person, more of a high stress person, if you are consuming foods that are going to stimulate that to occur more, you're only going to skyrocket that more higher. So, those are those sensitive people that diet can really play a role in kind of minimizing that stress response throughout the day, and vice versa. Even if you tend to have those low cortisol levels and maybe even have trouble getting up and running, diet can really play a role in naturally, in a very safe and great way, start to naturally help support the body to raise the cortisol when it needs to be, and then help it come down appropriate in the right timing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think those influences are so powerful. And, we do need cortisol to get us going in the morning. There's a normal cortisol rhythm during the day. So we want it to really function optimally. And as you said, not too low, not too high, but we can influence that with food. And especially if we're eating those processed sugary foods and your blood sugars, going sky high, dropping, you're going to have a compensatory response of the nervous system and cortisol that's going to shoot up and worsen everything. And then you're on a roller coaster up and down.
So, Dr. Young, I think I'd like to jump in here and talk a little bit about stress because I think when most of us think of it, you think of like a tense situation or something that's going on, and that being the stress. But a lot of the stress that we go through, it's kind of within our bodies, right? So when you're talking about eating certain things, it's not maybe a tense situation or something that's affecting you in that way, but it's just your body is kind of struggling with some of the things that you put in, and it's creating these issues that just kind of cascade.
I agree. And, I think about certainly stress is a reaction to, external factors and situations in our life. And that's the physiological response. But we definitely can use food to calm that. And we can use the stress management techniques. But food can really make a difference here in, preventing that response or, blunting that response.
Yeah, that's so amazing. And that's one of just the fascinating things as we've been doing these Nutrition Essentials podcasts is you see these links between food and all these things happening in your body that you just don't connect with what's on your plate.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So since we've been talking about all the stuff that food can do to you, I think we should probably start breaking down the foods that you should either avoid or gravitate towards. So from everything we've said, there's certain foods that definitely seem to trigger stress and anxiety and lead to some of these nutritional deficiencies. Um, what should we be avoiding, Julia? What are the things that shouldn't be on our table?
Great question, John. So, Dr. Young beautifully touched on a few things, but specifically processed foods. We really want to avoid processed foods, snack foods, packaged foods. They're high in refined flours, sugars. Those foods tend to spike those blood sugars up high, kind of giving you maybe that boost of energy initially, but then plummets your blood sugar, drops it, and then kind of makes you feel, again, that low feeling, craving those sugars again. And it's this vicious cycle of consuming these high sugary foods to get that kind of artificial energy and boost, but it's wreaking havoc on our system and our cortisol levels, not to mention the fact that there's very little, if any, nutritional value to these foods.
These are the vending machine items that you're seeing so often, right?
Yeah, processed packaged snack foods. And then, to couple with that, the sugary foods. So, plain old sugar as we think of it, in soda or sweetened drinks, and candies and cookies and cakes and pies and jams and jellies and chocolate and candy bars in whatever form you could be taking it in. There's so many options, but those sugary foods, those processed foods, those are definitely a big no-no. Especially when it comes to kind of spiking and dropping that blood sugar. Caffeine can be that stimulant, can create that stimulant effect, but a lot of times it can lead to that spike in cortisol and that feeling of anxious. It can increase the levels of anxiety and stress. So even not just coffee that we think of caffeine, but energy drinks, even tea, depends on how sensitive. Dark chocolate, a lot, even some milk chocolate will have some caffeine. So caffeinated beverages can certainly lead to some influence there too.
Yeah. And Dr. Young, I know when we were talking ahead of the podcast, you were really focused on caffeinated products and what they can do with stress.
Yeah, definitely. And Julia definitely described that beautifully. Of a little caffeine for the average person, I think, is just fine. I have 1 cup of coffee in the morning myself, but in the sensitive person, and that may be someone with anxiety, of course, or just excess caffeine in coffee, tea, definitely the energy drinks, just leads to overstimulation of the nervous system. And then also it often impacts sleep, which is going to also set us up for, the changes, the spikes and drops in cortisol, blood sugar, and anxiety. So risk of anxiety. So, a little bit goes a long way there. And some people actually might benefit from just avoiding caffeine altogether.
I know even some people metabolize caffeine in different rates too. So you have to recognize, are you a fast metabolizer or a slow metabolizer of caffeine? So it if you can kind of pinpoint, if it takes caffeine a long time to get out of your system, then that will certainly affect your sleep. Even maybe if you're having it at noon, it could certainly still affect sleep, or it can certainly still affect anxiety throughout the day. So it's very important, I think, to be self-aware when it comes to all food, but specifically caffeine.
And I agree. I mean, our detox pathways are all different. Speaking about caffeine here, and as many women go through menopause, they may actually metabolize caffeine more slowly. And for some, it may stay in the system for up to, 24 hours. So something to really, check in with yourself and see if that's affecting you.
So Julia, you were midway through your list there. We kind of went over the processed foods, the added sugars, caffeine. What other things should we be looking to kind of limit?
Sure. So fried and fatty foods, fast foods, again, kind of coupled with those processed foods, but think things like, drive-through restaurants, anything your kind of quick and easy convenient stuff can be pretty fatty, fried. Of course, alcohol can definitely stimulate anxiety and stress, especially the more you drink and the more frequent. An occasional drink here and there may be fine for you. But again, that's kind of like caffeine. You really have to recognize your threshold and how your body reacts to alcohol. Most people, it's great to avoid it, especially if you are more in that anxiety or stress state, which is the opposite of what most people do. They may pour that glass of wine after a hard day. thinking that it may help them, but in the end, it really doesn't.
Julia, that was a great point. And I'd like to kind of explore this a little bit. All of these foods that you mentioned, all seem to fall in that comfort food category. So when we're feeling stressed or we're feeling like, just really worn out from the day, these seem to be the foods that we lean on a lot. And yet they also seem to be the foods that are going to make the situation worse. That's a bad combo.
Sure. One key point, John, to mention is that if you're consuming all these ultra processed foods, sugary foods, caffeine, alcohol, fried foods, you're consuming these, you are likely not meeting your nutrient needs because these foods are void of nutrients. So most of the time you're consuming these foods, not consuming the adequate foods that are going to support a healthy mental system and mental health. And then that's going to lead to nutritional deficiencies. So nutritional deficiencies are a big issue, and they have been definitely correlated with more stress and anxiety.
Dr. Young, why do we gravitate towards some of these comfort foods that, clearly just aren't the best for us?
They give us a quick boost of blood sugar, a quick boost of cortisol, which maybe in the very short term kind of makes us feel better, but then you get on that yo-yo, that roller coaster where it creates that whole, cascade that's really going to make things worse. So I think, and Julie can also speak to this more, but if we can get more of the good things in and the foods with fiber that keep us satiated, protein as well, that keeps our blood sugar stable, we're less likely to need to reach for those, processed foods that give us the quick boost, but then lead to more trouble down the line.
Dr. Young, do you often see patients that have nutritional deficiencies?
That's a great question. So in functional medicine, we really love the science. We do a lot of testing. I really want to know where people are in their nutrient status. So I check this all the time, and I am still amazed after years and years of doing this. The level of nutrient deficiencies in people, vitamin C, B vitamins, magnesium. We know from like some of the studies like NHANES that, our soils are quite depleted, especially of minerals. We have to remember what we eat, which is so important, but if our digestion is poor, we may not get all the nutrients. But yes, I see so much nutrient deficiency, as well as I call it insufficiency. People, one, may be at the bottom end of the reference range, or have symptoms, even if they're, not frankly low in a nutrient, but we know therapeutically they'd benefit from a higher dose or supplementation.
All right, well, let's figure out then how we are going to get that nutrition in and what foods we need to throw in our carts when we're at the grocery store. So Julia, what are the items that might help us chill out and relax a little and keep our body working the way it should?
Sure. So I'm going to jump on the bandwagon of fiber. Fiber is essential. And the reason it's essential is because fibrous foods are prebiotic. So prebiotic foods feed the good bacteria in our guts, which are the probiotics. Those are the bacteria that help keep our immune system healthy, keep our whole body and our digestive system as healthy as possible. So fiber-rich foods are whole grains, fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, and legumes, which are beans and lentils. So those are phenomenal sources of fiber. So incorporating fiber-rich foods every single time you eat is key.
And those are the gut healthy foods, right? And we were talking about that brain-gut connection.
Yes. Yeah. And then you have foods that can support, and those prebiotic and probiotic foods are very important for a healthy gut. So probiotics are found in fermented foods, in things like kombucha and kimchi and sauerkraut, kefir, which is a drinkable yogurt. So those are great sources of probiotics. Again, just only increasing the amount of those good bacteria you have in your gut.
And if I can jump in, one more thing I think about as well, are so polyphenols are the plant chemicals in the colorful fruits and veggies, and the polyphenols have been also shown to support growth of the beneficial bacteria in the gut. So you're getting not only the fiber and all sorts of other nutrients, but these polyphenols are so important. So choosing lots of color, if you can on a daily basis, but at least over, a week, getting lots of those different ones in.
Yep. I always say, John,
I was just going to say,
remember
eat
this.
the rainbow.
Eat the rainbow.
Yeah.
Eat the rainbow for sure. So, when you fill your grocery cart, you really want to look down and say, do I have a fruit or vegetable from every color? So you want a super colorful grocery cart. And, that's really where it starts when you plan your meals and you fill your grocery cart, because then it's in your fridge and you'll consume it. So it's really important to start at the grocery store to kind of fill that cart up with all of those whole colorful foods.
Other things too that I think are so helpful are using herbs and spices. Those are anti-inflammatory. They lower those free radicals we were talking about that are kind of damaging to the body, aging and rusting. Or thinking about maybe some things like green tea and chamomile tea, those are actually have calming properties. So there's so many, foods and certain drinks that we can choose that are going to make a big difference in everything that we've been talking about.
Absolutely. I agree. And B vitamins are essential, specifically B12. B12 really aids in your methylation pathways, which Dr. Young, I'll let you talk about. But just to throw in some food sources of B12, things like liver, clams, sardines, beef, tuna, nutritional yeast, trout, salmon, dairy, and eggs. So think protein are where you get B12.
The B vitamins, I think, are key for our brain. And so, many of my patients are, self-educated. They do a lot. They listen to podcasts and listen or look at webinars, and they're familiar with methylation, especially the MTHFR gene, though that's one particular gene related to methylation. But methylation's a really critical process in the body. It's adding a methyl group, so a little bit of chemistry here. It's carbon and 3 hydrogens, and it's added to our DNA, and it influences which genes are active or inactive. It's important for detoxification and neurotransmitters, hormone balance. And it, especially we think about this MTHFR gene, which so many people ask me about. It's common to have an abnormal variant of one or both of the MTHFR genes. But it's important to know that even an abnormality or variant in that gene is only a potential for an abnormality in expression of that gene. In particular, this one influences how we utilize many of the B vitamins, but especially B12 and folate. And so we want definitely food sources. And for most people, ideally, who have, say, the MTHFR gene variant, we want to choose methylated folate and methylated B12. But really critical process, but sometimes we give too much influence to some of the gene variants.
So, Julia, you had mentioned the protein-rich foods, and I know that's sometimes a trouble spot for people because a lot of times you look at beef and pork and some things that can be a little fattier. How are you going to get that protein and not get things you don't want to?
Well, so you want to choose lean sources of grass-fed protein, beef or pork. Poultry, fish is a phenomenal source of B vitamins. So you really want to increase your fish. Not to mention, one thing we didn't mention was omega-3 fatty acids, essential for reducing inflammation. So that's where if you follow more of a Mediterranean style diet, fish is very abundant in a Mediterranean eating style. So we're eating fish at least 2 or 3 days a week. So those fattier fish are going to give you the omega-3, they're going to give you the B vitamins, and they're going to give you the protein. So really, that's the way you want to look at nutrition and what you're eating is because you want to try to maximize how many nutrients you can get in a single food. And that's where whole foods come into play. You're not just getting one thing out of this, you're getting multiple things, multiple nutrients and essential fats, phytochemicals, polyphenols, all of those things that aid your overall health. If you can maximize one food to get so many things, then it's not as overwhelming. So I think fish is definitely a way to go. Grass-fed beef is wonderful as well. Eggs are phenomenal. I feel like they've gotten a bad rap over years. I think, even with high cholesterol, you can safely have an egg a day. So egg yolks are, a phenomenal source and packed in nutrition, as well as the white where you get the protein. So I think it's really important to, expand the variety of foods you eat and really look at what nutrients those foods can support.
Yeah, in particular, I was thinking how, when we think about how important the omega-3 fats are, our cell membranes throughout the body are comprised of fat. So if we're choosing, too much saturated fat, the trans fats, too many of the omega-6s, they get really stiff, and all of our communication occurs at the level of the cell membrane. We want fluid, flexible membranes. So those wonderful omega-3 fats and all of the monounsaturated fats, so extra virgin olive oil and
chia seeds, flax seeds, those are
all of
great
those
sources of omega-3, walnuts, pumpkin seeds. That's where you can get, again, plant sources of omega-3, the form of alpha linolenic acid. So that's still good. We want a variety though. So you just really want to maximize healthy fats. They're essential for health.
Yes, definitely. And I'm partial to, I agree with Julia, fish can be a great source of omega-3s and protein. Ideally choosing, doing some research, if you're working with a dietitian, choosing the lower mercury, fish, smash fish, which we, I never get all of these, but wild salmon and sardines and herring and some mackerel are lower in mercury. I see a lot of patients who are, toxic with many different types of toxic exposures. And so we want to minimize that while getting all the good fats there.
Julia, they usually recommend limiting the number of servings of fish you have per week, right? Just because of mercury concerns?
Yeah, generally 12 ounces is what's recommended. But if you're using low mercury wild caught fish, I really even think you could exceed that if you're very aware of, the source of fish you're getting and you're really minimizing mercury rich fish. Think tuna, swordfish, tilefish, shark. Those are the ones that are high in mercury. I think tuna is probably the most common consumed in American diet. So, canned tuna varieties, you really want to minimize. Look for low mercury canned tuna, fresh tuna that's wild caught, but really, kind of space that out few and far between and maximize things, like the salmon.
And sardines are actually amazing. When I was doing my integrative medicine fellowship, Andy Weil taught us this recipe of mashing up the canned sardines, some chopped onion and Dijon mustard on a gluten-free cracker. It's amazing. So it's worth trying.
Recipe tips too. We have everything on this show. So when we're talking nutrients too, one that I know I read in advance of this and which I don't think we've hit on is magnesium rich foods. Is that something you should be looking for if you're looking to kind of control stress and anxiety through diet?
Absolutely. Most of us are deficient in magnesium. It's essential. It's responsible for over 300 enzymatic reactions in our body. Magnesium is definitely a super nutrient. Food sources of magnesium, things like almonds, pumpkin seeds, flax seeds, chia seeds, black beans, edamame, which are green soybeans. And those greens, those leafy greens like spinach, Swiss chard. Quinoa is a great source of magnesium. Avocados, bananas, dark chocolate. So all of these great plant-based foods are great sources of magnesium. Again, good sources of other nutrients like omega-3s, and we have some fiber-rich sources in there. polyphenols. So definitely upping your magnesium intake can certainly help you feel better.
Well, and that kind of leads us to the really big question here, which is how much of a difference can dietary changes make for someone if they're dealing with stress and anxiety and they want to bring that down? Dr. Young, when you're working with patients, do you see much of a change if they do make some of these adjustments in how they eat?
I think for most people, the results can be profound. We see very complex chronic patients who maybe have a lot more issues that need to be addressed as well. But the food, definitely one is foundational. And I would say for the majority of people, there's a huge benefit. And I'd say for a significant percentage of patients, that's all they need is to actually be, help with lifestyle and the dietary piece. It just makes such an amazing difference for a lot of people.
I couldn't agree with you more, Dr. Young. We always start with, let's clean up the diet first, right? Let's take out the things that could be hurting the situation and add foods that could be helping the situation. And sometimes that alone can make you feel so much better.
For sure.
Doctor, so how much of a focus do you typically put on diet when you see a patient with stress or anxiety symptoms?
A very strong focus. So everyone in our department sees one of our dietitians at least once, but usually on an ongoing basis. Since I think changing lifestyle and our diet is a process. But in my experience, if we don't have that foundation of healthy food, it makes everything else harder when we're trying to help people heal. So that is the foundation from my perspective.
Dr. Young, it's so great to hear that you refer everyone to a dietitian. I think that's awesome. I really think dietitians can really help in the journey of pinpointing which foods could be triggers, helping you develop a better eating plan that's specific to you, help guide you in incorporating some of these new foods and getting all these colorful foods in your diet, and slowly start to wean off some of the foods that are not serving you as well. So I think dietitians can be, essential in the role of really help managing some of the symptoms of stress and anxiety.
I agree. I mean, I think in this day and age of medicine, we want to individualize things for patients. And even though there's core concepts and core nutrition, some people might need more or less of something. Some people might have food sensitivities, which could be discussion for another day. But it's definitely a journey. And so to have a dietitian to be able to just make that journey with patients, I've seen, really turn people's lives around when they have that support.
So to help people on this journey, luckily we have both of you here. And so now we're going to tap into your combined wisdom and get some tips that people can use to use their diet to ease their stress and anxiety and make changes. So how can they go about doing that?
Well, first of all, I would say, take a little scan of your diet. See if there are influencing foods. Some of those foods we talked about that aren't serving your body as well. Can we start to decrease those foods, slowly eliminate those foods, and replace them with some of the foods that will support a healthy whole system? All those foods, whole foods we talked about. So slowly transitioning into that. And then even consider an elimination diet. So, to a very moderate degree. So if we know, let's just take caffeine. If we know every time you have that second cup of coffee, it seems like your anxiety level rises and you feel more anxious and jittery and more irritable. Well, maybe just playing around with not having that second cup of coffee and slowly maybe decreasing the volume of coffee you're consuming and seeing how your body's reacting. So if you already have pinpointed a couple of trigger foods, you can experiment on your own by decreasing them and slowly eliminating them. And then even keeping a little journal or a little note on how you feel. And you can already tailor your diet on your own just based on the cues your body is giving you in reaction to some of these foods and beverages.
I agree. A food diary, I think, can be helpful and really checking in. We live in such a busy society that, we're often eating on the run, and some of these food sensitivities can take up to 3 days to kind of have a reaction. So I think that can be helpful. And everyone is going to have a different timetable, slow and steady is good. The more you get some of those good things in, it's going to calm cravings, and you're going to feel better. And I think it makes it easier to make some of the other changes of slowly eliminating the foods that are not serving you.
Dr. Young, you made a good point of cravings. We didn't touch base on that. I wanted to just throw out one quick comment on that. We didn't mention that all of those hyper processed foods and sugary foods are designed to make us crave them. So the more you consume them, the more you crave them. So if you struggle with cravings, sugar cravings, caffeine cravings, that's because a lot of those foods are designed to create that craving. So as you start to eliminate, cut them down, and focus on whole foods, those cravings will significantly decrease, if not subside completely.
Absolutely. And I see that in those foods, and the chemicals and sugar light up the same areas of the brain related to drug addiction. So, absolutely, as you cut those out, you're going to have fewer cravings.
And Julia, the advice on that then would just be, as people are at the store, just you need to kind of stop or not buy as much of that and just really fill your fridge and your pantry with these more of these whole foods and things that are gonna give you those nutrients you need, as opposed to just sugar you up.
Absolutely. I mean, those foods are going to make their way into our diet here and there. But when you're in control and you're shopping and you're choosing, try to choose whole foods as often as possible. If you can, 100% of the time would be great. Because, we're going to go to a party or go out to eat, and some of those foods will infiltrate into your diet. And that's okay here and there. But if you are consuming 80 to 90% of these whole foods, you're going to feel better, physically and emotionally. And when you have these other, maybe not so healthy foods, you won't want them as much. You might just have a smaller amount. And then you may even realize how your body's reacting to them even more. So just, whatever you can control, try to do the best you can in consuming as many whole foods as possible.
Yeah, I think we also, from my perspective, always want to, urge patients to be cautious of, there's even in the health food stores, so many of those packaged foods are presented as healthy, and they're really not. Your dietitian can help you learn how to read labels to be a good consumer for yourself.
Really stick to the outside, right? Whole foods, one ingredient foods. I always tell people one ingredient food. That's what you're looking for.
Well, you always say shop the perimeter of the store, right,
Yep.
Julia?
And if you notice on a label that, number one, there's more than maybe 2 or 3 ingredients, and you don't recognize the name of it, put it back.
I completely agree.
So it truly is amazing, just the effect that food has on our bodies and minds. And I want to thank both of you for giving us such a great look at it and a focus. So before we part ways, though, is there anything else you'd like to add regarding the connection between food, stress, and anxiety?
So I think just, as a physician, we all experience stress. But if someone really starts to feel overwhelmed all the time, or noticing they're really feeling anxious, they're having trouble sleeping, they're overeating or can't eat enough, then it's time to actually, really talk to your primary care doc, look at additional options. So just, I think that's important to know.
Great point, Dr. Young. And from a nutrition perspective, we we provided so much great information here, and it can be overwhelming. So one simple step I would recommend with starting is taking one processed food out of your diet and replacing it with a whole food, whatever your choice might be. Just start there, one step at a time, and then begin to take a step two and replace it with another one, and just continue at your pace, and every little change will make a positive impact.
Well, that's a great note to end on, Julia. I want to thank both of you for spending time with us today and just sharing so much fabulous information.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Young. You had a lot of great, phenomenal information to share. Really appreciate your input.
Thank you both.
If you're regularly feeling stressed or overwhelmed, take a moment to consider what's on your plate. Changing your diet may address what you're experiencing. In many cases, the key to feeling better may be eating better. If you liked what you heard today, please hit the subscribe button and leave a comment to share your thoughts. Till next time, eat well.